My name is Rick Ulfik, and I'm founder of We the World and the We campaign at we.net. Today is part two of our three-part series called Dismantling Racism, Past, Present, and Future. On part two today, we will be looking at dismantling racism in the present with a racial reconciliation roundtable featuring Reverend Joseph Jones, Reverend Dr. Paul Vries, Bishop Bruce Perryman, Pastor Dan Stratton, and our co-host for today and the producer of this show, Dr. Ugoji Adanma Ezi, Esquire. Before I start, I just want to mention that if you are inspired to have similar conversations in your community or your circles, please tell us about it. You can email us at this address, mlk at we.net. That's mlk at we.net. And of course, you can find out more and connect with We the World in general by going to we.net. Now let's bring in my co-host and producer of this broadcast, Dr. Ugoji Adanma Ezi, Esquire, who is CEO and founder of A Fractured World, and she is also coordinator of We the World's campaign for human rights. Welcome to the broadcast, Dr. Ugoji, and can you please give folks a bit of background about today's Racial Reconciliation Roundtable?
Thank you very much, Rick. Thank you for your leadership, and I welcome you one and all to MLK Dismantling Racism, the Racial Reconciliation Roundtable Ambassadors for the Kingdom of God. Today we honor the legacy of the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This past weekend there have been sermons all over the world, and more particularly in the United States. If I may quote from Rabbi Abi Shirovsky, who said, I quote, "As we begin the 21st year of the 21st century, history is unfolding before us. We are at a time in our nation when unity and allyship must prevail. We must use our words to advocate for equity and justice, to speak out and follow through on the promise to truly be allies. We must do this now." If I also may quote from the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in his 1963 letter from a Birmingham jail, I quote, "In a real sense, life is interrelated. All men are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is interrelated structure of reality," end of quote. Today in this roundtable, the whole objective is to bring religious leaders from two diverse racial backgrounds, the Black church and the white church, to break bread, to integrate, to listen to each other and have a frank discussion on race, discrimination, and also prejudice. It gives me great pleasure to ask the first question to Bishop Bruce Perryman. And the question I'd like to ask him is, how do you see the role of the church today, as I quote, for unity and allyship in the prevailing disunity in the United States? You'll mute yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Ugoji. Thank you, Rick. And it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. And the question that you asked is a very, very pertinent and important question about the role of the church today with the present conditions. And what the church has to do is the church has to step up and be the church. The church has to speak to the issues that are going on today. There's so much disunity. There's so much disharmony. There is so much of people against each other and going in different directions, and the climate and the rhetoric that is being expressed is just encouraging this kind of behavior. And it's really only the church, I believe, that can really step up and do so. You know, the Lord has given the church the spirit of reconciliation. We are the ones that are supposed to speak the word of healing. We are the ones that are supposed to speak the words of reconciliation. 2 Chronicles 7:14 says, if my people who are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven. I will forgive their sin and I will heal their land. So it starts with us first, quite honestly. We have to come together. We have to speak with one voice. We have to speak with one heart. And we have to speak to our people. You know, so often when things of this means comes together, the church has largely been silent. You know, what we normally resort to, and it's not that it is not good, but we resort to praying and being in silence. The prayer is powerful, but the Bible tells us in the book of James that faith without works is dead. So we have to come together, we have to pray, and we have to speak first to ourselves. We have to look within ourselves and know that we have to speak to our congregations and let our congregations know that when there is injustice, we have to speak to it. When we see things in our brothers being misused and abused, we have to speak to it. And it's not just one church, but all churches. If we as an African American church see inequities going on in other races, we have to speak to that, and not just when it applies to the Black church. And when the white church sees things that are happening in the Black communities, the white church needs to speak to it. There has been a saying by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that the most segregated hour is 11 o'clock on Sunday morning. And that can't be. You know, the church has to come together. Spiritually speaking, you know, there is no Black church, there is no white church. You know, there's no Black heaven, there's no white heaven. There's one God, and we must come together and speak to these things. So we have to be in a place also where we're not afraid to speak truth. You know, unfortunately, because we are involved in so many different areas in the world, sometimes we are afraid to speak the truth because it would affect our following. It'll affect our membership. It'll affect our popularity. The church cannot be that way. The church has to be united and be encouraged and powerful to speak the truth in the face of injustice, in the face of inequities, and let people know that right is right and wrong is wrong. So the first thing we have to do is look within ourselves. The first thing we have to do is see where we have fallen short, how we have not spoken to our congregations and strengthen them and speak with one mind. And the next thing we have to do is join ourselves with other congregations. We have to be together. We have to speak one mind, one voice, so that people will know that we are together. And then when issues arise, we have to speak to our congressmen, our elected officials. We have to write letters. We have to be able to show up at offices and speak to power and let them know that things must change. I'm so heartbroken when I see people that are suffering because of inequities in education and in healthcare and with the police department. You know, it is important for us to speak to these things and speak as a unified voice. So again, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves, pray, seek my face, turn from their wicked ways, the Lord will hear from heaven and heal our land.
Thank you very much, Bishop Hermon. Now, if I may turn to Pastor Paul de Vries, how far do you think we've come since the Civil Rights Day?
Well, on one hand, we've come a long ways. There's a lot of laws have been changed. A lot of institutions have been much more affirming of equality of opportunity. And, you know, the loaning practices of banks are perhaps a tiny bit less biased, but we've come a long way on the books, so to speak. But I think in terms of people's habits and on a spiritual basis, on a personal basis, we have a very long ways to go. Black and white work together at work in many places, but in lots of places like New York City, almost all the children go to schools that are, you know, 95, 96% their own race. So there's very little interaction. And so the segregation of the races in housing and in schools is a big problem, and the churches too. We're not necessarily a representative group. Pastor Dan Stratton, who's also on this panel, and I are both intensely involved in churches that are not racially defined, that are multi-ethnic. I'm an officer of 3 different churches, and in one of them, the church is 97% Black, but I'm an officer there, and I'm excited to serve God and help the church have a bigger and bigger vision, engaging the community. But so in one sense, we've made a lot of progress on the book, so to speak, in the laws, but I think in terms of people's loves, their relationships, their Christian fellowship, their choices of friends, we have a long ways to go to live up to Jesus' prayer in John 17, that the church might be one, that there would be a unity, a radical unity of people that believe in Jesus.
Thank you very much. The next question I have is for Pastor Jones, Joseph Jones. What is the state of the present state of the Black and brown community in the United States, and more particularly in your borough?
Thank you, Dr. Ugoji. It's a pleasure to be on here with my brothers to speak to you and
Welcome.
to the community. The state of the Black community is very, very hard to determine in any real one sense. In one sense, you see many of us have risen financially and positionally. Many of our Black community leaders and people of color, they're homeowners, they're leaders in business and entrepreneurship, but yet there is still inequity, there's still diverse issues involving the healthcare field, and definite financial support from areas of our government. There are difficulties in how we're dealing with police reform. There's difficulty in dealing with our educational system, definitely in our penal system. Our Black communities are suffering from many of the issues of homelessness and dealing with issues of hunger. Our children are suffering. So if you looked at it from one lens, we have people that are definitely better than they have been, but not as good as we should be, with the kind of concerns and issues that have been overcome since Dr. King. We should be farther along. We should be better, especially in the church when it comes to our Black communities. It's very different and diverse, and especially in the areas of human rights. We are not being given a fair hand. We're not asking for anything more than anyone else should get, just a fair, equitable understanding of being humane, being compassionate, meaning what you say, do what you say, without forcing us to have to do things that unfortunately many of us have to do just to survive, just to maintain. There is a great difficulty in discriminatory behavior and practices that are targeted to our communities. Even during this COVID-19 virus, predominantly many of our people have died much more than have been in other communities. Yet we're the last ones to get the information about how the COVID-19 worked and how the vaccine is working. We're the last to get information on how we're to address it and deal with it, but we're the first ones being requested to get in line. So it's very difficult to determine our state in and of itself, because as it was said in Shakespeare, in so many other areas, sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. But it's just something that we have to strive to continue to work to get it better, to get it to a place of balance. And that's what we're looking to do right now. We're trying to find a way to get our Black communities to be more balanced in their efforts of working unified, dealing with the issues that are definitely humane in our government as well as in our community. And pulling together in this unified effort will make it better for other communities, make it better for other neighborhoods and other businesses. And we need to be considerate of that effort. But the Black community is not as bad as it used to be, but not as good as it could be.
And thank you very much, Pastor Jones. Now, if I may put this question to Pastor Daniel Stratton, good to see you again. You have spoken in an article I have before me on the 3 C's: compassion, courage, and commitment. Let me take compassion. You said that racism, discrimination, and prejudice are harmful to the lives of people, and that we need to care deeply about what happens to people when these dynamics are in place. How do you believe that we can deal with this? What is the role of a church? How do you think a church can be more compassionate, especially in the current climate in the United States? How can we, the church, achieve compassion? Is the church compassionate enough? Is
Well,
it
I think compassion,
racism, discrimination, and prejudice as it ought to?
well, those are some big issues, as you know, and these are issues that are centuries, if not millennia, if not all time. These are not simple solutions on any way. And when somebody's offended or hurt, then those hurts become deep, and that's where the compassion comes in. Compassion requires us to engage. What happens here in the United States of America, what happens across the country, and it's seen in various ways, where it's always easier to run to our own familiar corners than to connect, engage, and actually have dialogue and conversation with the goal of truly collaborating, because we believe that together we are stronger. We believe that together we are smarter. We believe that together we are more compassionate. I believe deeply that no one group has compassion locked down. No one group has courage locked down. No one group has commitment locked down. So what we've done as the beginners or the founders of the Racial Reconciliation Roundtable is we've just agreed to work on these things. Compassion is truly one thing to one person and another thing to another person. And I've learned over time that the most dangerous thing you can bring to the table when you're trying to address prejudice, discrimination, and racism is condescension. Oh, I know what the answer is. Oh, I absolutely know what the answer is. You don't know what the answer is until you've engaged. Quincy Jones said it well, you have to go to know, And I think that's a beautiful thing. I've been to Africa, I've been to India, I've spent a lot of time with the Cubans, down in Cuba, down in Mexico with the Native Americans, not only the Navajo, but the Crow. And when you walk with these people, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a big advocate for the Navajo, for the Indians, the Creek down in Alabama and in Georgia. And he gained a great deal of credibility as he went, engaged these people, and he wasn't just about the Black plight. He was also about the Native American plight. He was about true racism, discrimination, and prejudice. So we, as we have come together to work on this compassion, we recognize, all four of us that are here with you today, Doctor, and with this group, we recognize that we need to hear each other, to work together, that we need each other to find that compassion, that we are listening carefully. We're also being very careful to find what we can agree upon, and also very careful to speak, to make sure that everyone is heard. It's just too easy in the climate today, as Bishop Perryman said, to pull back and not really share everything that we're feeling or asking the awkward question. I think compassion is a lot like our biblical word grace. You know, I have to give myself permission to make a mistake. I have to give myself permission to say the wrong thing for us to arrive at compassion. So when we came together, I said, well, let me take a shot. You read from the document that I wrote out there. You know, I'm a white guy. You know, I live this world like a white guy. I'm an Ivy League school guy. You know, but I also grew up one of 7 children, where my dad worked 3 jobs and all these different things. So it's hard for me when somebody says, well, everything's been handed to you, Dan. If you were a Black man, you would have never, you know, because I've spent my life, my church is integrated, a lot of Black people in my church who I love. I've spent my life trying to open doors for people, bring favor to people, because I realized that doors had even been shut to me. And so what happens is, in this situation, is all of us, like you said, like Dr. Paul said, everyone on this call, it needs to begin with compassion is dialogue. Compassion is courage to make a mistake and then give grace. I allow those who are willing to try to be peacemakers to take on these topics need to have thick skin. We talked about this in the first couple of meetings. We're going to get hammered for this, but it doesn't matter because it's that important to us. Let us agree with Dr. Martin Luther King. Let us work with discipline, with commitment, with consistency, until we find real solutions that we can agree upon. And I find that to be far more compassionate than me just giving out pure water and a couple of knapsacks at, you know, when the school year starts.
And thank you very much. At this juncture, I'd like to pay tribute to the late Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, of blessed memory, who died recently. I'd like also to quote from him, and I'll put a question to everybody. It's in for the grab. I quote, "The test of faith is whether I can make space for difference. Can I recognize God's image in someone who is not in my image, whose language, faith, ideals are different from mine? If I cannot, then I have made God in my image instead of allowing him
Amen.
to make me in his," end of quotes. Can any of you respond to this? Quotes. Pastor Paul, I see you're anxious.
Well, I think what Rabbi Sachs said is right on. But I think the next step then, once we agree, is to implement this. And I encourage people for a very simple meditation, spiritual meditation, and especially in the old days, you know, before the COVID, when sidewalks in New York were filled, to get from one place to the other, there's just, you know, you see hundreds of people along the way. People every ethnic background, all sizes and shapes and ages and economic levels. But to take the time to look one at a time at each person and say within our own minds, within our own spirits, there's an image of God. There is an image of God. And to recognize that God has many colors, many kinds of faces, is in his image, in his likeness. There are people that are engaged on all kinds of levels in society, in New York and any other place. Another step to that would be when we want to give someone a compliment. You know, there are a lot of nice ways to give compliments, but I'm finding it's very helpful, very positive to say to someone, you know, you remind me of your father, your heavenly father. You have the attribute of listening, like God listens. And to really affirm that image of God, that likeness to our heavenly Father, very directly, very specifically to a person's face. And that'll, in every case I've done that, has just brought a wonderful joy and positive response, but it also helps mess up our own remnants of perhaps some bias or prejudice as we find ourselves affirming God's image in people with a whole range of ethnic backgrounds, or again, education levels or spiritual pilgrimages. So I absolutely believe that. And then we'll begin to see people not so much in terms of the ethnic backgrounds or how educated they look, but we'll see them much more as brothers and sisters, where we already have a relationship of this amazing godly family. So I agree 100% with Rabbi Jonathan Sachs on that point, thoroughly.
Yeah, the quote was from the 2003 book, The Dignity of Difference, that is a test of faith is recognizing God's image in others. How would you respond to that, Bishop Bruce Perryman?
I would also respond that I agree 100%. I think that is the problem. I think many of us create God in our image, you know, rather than seeing God for who he is. And that's part of the role of the church, I believe, as well. We are the ones that have the spiritual connection to God. And if we're seeing God the way we want to see God, that is a major problem. And it begins with God actually being in our hearts. Our hearts have to be transformed. I honestly 100% believe that this is a spiritual issue. You know, this is a problem of self. I think that because we are so enveloped in ourself and who we are and what we want for ourselves, it causes us not to love our neighbor. It causes us not to love our brother. It causes us to feel ourselves better than someone else. It causes us not to see someone as an equal human being with the right to be loved and to be treated as a human being. And unless we are able to do that, it's going to be a challenge to bring people together. But that is our responsibility, especially as the church. It only the power of God, I believe, can bring about that sort of transformation. And in order for us to have these kinds of discussions, we have to see each other as equals, as someone that we can speak to and to relate to. We can't have an attitude that it's us against them. You know, there's only one us in this picture if we're God's children. So, you know, we're all part of the family of God, and we have to see each other as fighting for one another rather than fighting for ourselves, and not at the expense of losing something that we have or trying to gain something that belongs to somebody else. You know, we have to see each other as children of God. And unless we're able to do that, then that is absolutely true. We are creating an image of God that is not of God, and that must change.
Thank you very much. Could I put the same question to you, Pastor Jones?
Yes, I think the rabbi is spot on. I believe that the whole perception of seeing people as images of God will definitely determine how you deal with them, how you address them. Often in the Bible, you'll see people that are identified not by their name, they're identified by their condition. A certain man who was paralytic, a certain woman who had an issue of blood. I think we look at people and we identify them by their neighborhood, by the color of their skin, by the haves and the have-nots, when we should be seeing them as people that have been made in God's image. How do you treat the image of God? How do you treat someone who is representative of God the Father, the creator of everything? When we are definitely in a position of looking at people differently, and looking at them in a diverse manner, looking at them as whether or not they meet our particular perception and standard, there's always going to be a diminished opportunity to work with them on the case level of them being the image of God. Even in their fallacies, even in their flaws, it's still us, the image of God. And if we can work toward seeing people in that regard, and as my brother Paul said, that the exercise of seeing them as what God made them rather than as what we would like them to be, we'd be going a lot further in bringing more unity and definitely more equitable working together if we could do it that way.
Thank you very much, Pastor Jones. Can I put the same question to you, Pastor Dan Stratton?
Well, I think seeing each other as equals is something that we can strive to do. I think all of us deal with insecurities and things that we have. And as I said before, when the going gets rough, everybody wants to kind of go back to their own families. They want to go back to their own familiarity, their comfort zones. And so I think it's very important for us to be as transparent as we can with our own group of people. I know that my church, the Bible, Jesus, my walk with the Lord, my prayer life, they are constraints for me. They challenge me. They convict me if I say something that, with a very diverse group that I have, over the years, I've said some things that didn't sit well with certain communities, and I've had to kind of rethink it and come back to it. So I try my best to see everybody as a child of God. And the one thing that you do as a pastor, as a minister, is you do your very best for those who come to you. And so I have a congregation, I always tell them, tease them, guys, I didn't pick any one of you. You all picked me. You could go anywhere in the city, but I didn't pick a single one of you. So don't get mad at me. I always say it like that. But the idea of that is you kind of attract a group of people that like you and that celebrate you and that really enjoy you and all that. And so in order truly to accomplish what the rabbi was talking about and what the other reverends were talking about, is you got to go. I got to go to Bishop Bruce's church. I got to go with Pastor Joe and go to his and see if the words that I say in my own congregation ring true somewhere else. Truth is truth only when it can't just ring true in your own house. It can't just ring true in the white neighborhood. It can't just ring true in one place. And one of the beautiful things that I've had, I've been ministering over 30 years now, is to go to places like Cuba and have them say to me, you don't seem American to me. You seem, they're taught not to like Americans. Or when you go to the Native American people and they go, are you sure that you haven't spent more time down here with us? And it's not because, I'm overly nice, because I'm not that nice and all these different things. But the idea is the Word of God really does divide, and it helps you to run the gauntlet, helps you to run through the labyrinth, through the maze. If you stick to the word and you stick to loving every single person that's right in front of you, and then you also don't do that in a way where you diminish yourself. You have to come in there without an apology, giving grace and accepting grace. I don't want to see the one thing that really destroys this conversation is if somebody comes in and tries to speak the language of a group he doesn't have any concept of what he's talking about. All right, like if I come in and try to pretend I'm, Bronx, 179th Street, black. Come on. I mean, it's like stupid. I mean, it would be as dumb as possible. I'd be saying words and I'd be pronouncing my T's at the end of the word and, all this stuff. And people would just say, are you out of your mind? You don't fit in. So don't try to fit in that way. The idea is for us to go and be honest and loving, but unapologetic in the sense, because if your heart is pure and your goal is truly reconciliation, then give that grace without apology. And so this is where we are right now in our conversations that we're having, but we're in the very beginnings of them. And I'm going to learn a lot, and these other leaders help me to learn a lot. But I know for a fact, if I just stay in my own community, I'm not going to develop the skills necessary to really bring solutions to this conversation. And I've got to be willing to be, I hate to say it this way, insulted. I've got to be willing to be disagreed with. I've got to be willing to have my feelings hurt, be offended. And I've got to be quick to explain to people if I offend or hurt or insult inadvertently, or even out of when I get hurt real quick, out of some knee jerk that I might have in defense of myself or survival instinct, I've got to be quick to apologize then, but not walking in. I hope this makes sense. I hope I'm being clear on this. So,
Yes, it makes sense, Pastor Dan. And I'd like, first of all, to thank you for your courage, for admitting that occasionally you've made a mistake. The last time I saw you, we were at a meeting, an interfaith meeting. And one thing that I took away with me, a takeaway, was the last word you said to me. And you said to me that you wanted to learn. You wanted to learn. And I really respected you for that. Because anybody can be in an environment and you don't really understand the dynamics, especially when you're in an interfaith environment.
right.
It's extremely difficult. You cannot come away, even me myself as a woman of color, I cannot say I understand everything. So I'd like to thank you very much for your courage, for admitting that sometimes you've made mistakes, because we've all made mistakes. None of us are innocent. Now,
I have a question.
sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. This is great, and I thank you all for sharing your experience. I'm wondering if any of you have had community dialogues with the specific goal of healing the divides that we're talking about, and basically ending racism. And I'm just wondering if any of you have done that. How did it look, and how what worked, what didn't work, and do you feel that it was successful? And before, and you think about it, but I just want to mention that one of our members in We the World is doing something specifically on this. Her name is Sharon Ria, and she is doing. She has a program that she calls No Judgment, Just Love. And what she's been doing recently is having these kinds of dialogues in a safe environment, which she calls the comfy couch. And she's like a family coach, and helping families who have disagreements and that kind of thing. And before COVID happened, she would have them come in on the comfy couch physically, and in a safe environment they could talk about what the conflict is. But now it's online, but it's the same kind of same kind of idea, an environment that's safe where people can speak about what's on their minds. But the goal is to heal this divide. So anyone have any experiences that they would like to share how it worked? Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Yes, I've had two kind of big experiences, and probably in some sense a lifetime of doing this as well. I was awakened to structural racism when I began 8th grade. And a number of my friends who were just as smart as I, who were Black, were not in the college-bound classes in a school that was half Black and half white. But the college-bound classes were strictly white. And it made no sense to me because clearly the capacity level, the ability level was shared broadly. Many of my Black friends were able to do algebra problems in their head just as fast, if not faster than I. When I pled with the guidance counselors to give these friends of mine a test to allow them to qualify to be in the pre-algebra class, I was, even though I was one of their pet students, I was quickly shown the door and told never to question their professional judgment ever again. When as an 8th grader, I saw the racism that was blinding them. And in any case, there are a lot of these stories, but perhaps a very dramatic case, right after I was out of seminary, I was invited to be a pastor of a church of 300 in a racially charged area in central Virginia. And lo and behold, less than a half a mile from the parsonage, from the pastor's home for serving that church, was the KKK headquarters for 3 counties. And the racism was just thick, very thick, including in the congregation itself. There were KKK sympathizers at least. But I spoke very clearly, very lovingly. I think the key theme verse that I kept coming back to, not so much in the preaching, but just for my own spiritual compass, was where Paul says in Ephesians chapter 4, speak the truth in love. And sometimes I had a lot of truth to say, but I felt restrained by the Lord until I could say those same truths in love to these racist people. And one of the first things I did too was to invite all the pastors in the community to come to my home. I was the youngest pastor. I was the one that was just finished with seminary, pastoring the largest church of 300. And no time ever before had all the pastors gotten together. But within a couple of meetings, we had a good group of African-American pastors, some of the white pastors, some other white pastors, even from their pulpits, spoke against me personally, questioning my ordination because I was stirring up racial justice issues as if that were not part of the very fabric of Scripture. But we changed things by doing things together, having a joint Thanksgiving Eve service, joint Monday, Thursday, on the Thursday just before Good Friday, joint service. We move around, have a choir in one church, meet at one church, a choir from another church, pastor from another church, so that we were mixing it up and doing things together. And then summer Bible school program, we exploded it to be 4 times as big as any summer Bible school program ever before in that community because we were working together. And one of the nicest compliments about church came from a child whose parents and grandparents were in the KKK and they came occasionally to the church, but he was there. And I said to him, hey, Joe, it's good to see you in summer Bible school. And he put his hands on his hips and he said to me, he was only like 8 years old. He looked at me in the eye and he said, Pastor, I had to come. This is the happening place. The excitement of working together as children of God had captured the excitement of this 8-year-old who's the son and grandson of KKK members. And I thought, man, God can still do miracles. And I could share more, but this engagement, listening to one another, those meetings at our home, starting about a month after I moved there, where Pastor said they had never sat down, black and white, ever, even one-on-one, to had a big bowl of the scrambled eggs and pancakes that I made and laid it on the table, and we listened to one another and then prayed together, and the community got changed because it was about God. It wasn't about my church or your church or my race or the other person's race. It was about doing things that unified us because God was already unifying us.
Well, thank you, Paul. Do other folks have anything that you have done with community dialogues that you want to share, and the pluses and minuses, successes, failures, or anything?
Rick, my work with the Commission on Human Rights as the faith-based liaison has definitely broadened the perspective of unification, not only crossing color lines and cultural lines, but religious lines, recognizing that what Dr. Paul is saying is once we can get together and look past our religious dogma, and what day you worship and what time you have service and what practices you have, and really put it to the bare bones of we believe in God. We believe in better for our families and for our communities, that we're all humans and we're all supposed to be humane. And as Pastor Dan said, being compassionate and having the grace to be able to say, hey, I'm not going to get it right. Just check me. One of the great things I love about the Racial Reconciliation Roundtable is that we made it very clear that as you're being a part of this group, you have to be able to take a hit, be able to say, hey, forgive me, I've made a mistake. Let's move on, but thank you for teaching me. I've been doing this kind of work now for almost 35 years, bringing houses of worship together, but bringing them together on different cultural and color levels on things that are germane for all of us, that benefit all of us. The Commission on Human Rights mandate is to formulate a better working relationship of community based upon looking past the color of skin, looking past our gender roles, looking past our position as a particular leader, and just saying, hey, what is it that we can agree upon, and how do we work to make it better for not just you and me, but for everybody? And it has worked greatly. When I was working for the Kings County DA's office for over 35 years as their liaison, we had a thing called the gun buyback program. I wrote it, I developed it, and it was based upon the churches just opening their doors and allowing people to know if you bring the gun to the church, no harm will come to you and you won't be arrested. We started out with Christian churches, but by the time we saw the success of it, Catholic churches were opening their doors, white churches were opening their doors, Muslim houses of worship were opening their doors, because we found something that everybody agreed: guns don't need to be in our community. And people don't need to be hurt by guns. If we can move to the place where we can find things that are uniformly a problem for everybody, these barriers would fall down like a house of cards, and we can get some stuff done.
Hallelujah.
Definitely.
There's a question that I wanted to put to some of you as you're discussing communities. What is the church actually doing as regards sanctuary cities, undocumented migrants, immigration, internally displaced persons? I don't really see, and also the issue of human trafficking. There are not many churches who seem to be doing much in this area. I mean, migrants, victims who are trafficked, internally displaced persons, those in sanctuary cities, they are part of the community. What role do you believe the church should play as regards these individuals? I mean, we live in a world with the ongoing refugee crisis. Refugees are in the United States, for sake of argument. You have migrants. Some cities are sanctuary cities. You have the issue of immigration. I mean, these are social issues that are really playing out in front of us. Now, what role do you see the church play in this? Because I, for one, don't think the church is doing much apart from the Catholic Church, and Pope Francis, he talks about it. You know, migrants, refugees, internally displaced persons, they're on our doorsteps. I mean, what is the church going to do about it? And also the sensitive issue of human trafficking. You know, what role is the church playing in this? Sorry, Pastor Paul, your hands are up.
Sure, sure. Well, I think that a lot is being done. The toughest one of those that you mentioned is human trafficking, because if it's involved in sexual trafficking, the pimps are really wicked people, and they make so much money over the the exploitation of the bodies, especially of boys and girls in their teenage years, that they can really cause havoc to anyone that upsets their trade. And it's so, I'm not giving an excuse. I'm just saying it's a serious matter to get into. And I've urged a number of churches to do so. And the numbers are small because the challenge is so huge. So maybe we need to compare notes more to be able to minister effectively to that whole huge segment. In a big city like New York, there are thousands and thousands of teenagers from 10 years old and older that are victims of this sex trafficking. In terms of people that are not documented, my experience with churches that I'm involved in is that everybody is welcome. And I've had people ask the weird question, if the person's not documented, can we baptize them? And I've said, hey, you're not accountable to the state. You're not accountable to have immigration papers. When someone commits themselves to God and want to celebrate that with baptism, focus on the spiritual issues that really affirm them, and then partner with them to help to work out their legal status. So I think a lot is going on. Could be a lot more, but the spiritual transformation of recognizing the special gift of humanity and being a child of God, churches can affirm regardless of immigration status, and need to do so much more aggressively and consistently.
I would like to just add.
Sorry, Pastor Jones, would you like to answer that question? Would you like to chip in, Pastor Jones?
Yeah, but let me hear from Pastor Dan first.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's all right. I mean, we are, one of the things we're coming together on racial reconciliation, you know, the sanctuary cities, the refugees, it's a huge issue. The place where I come in contact with, believe it or not, Dr. Ugoji, is with people from South America more than from like Africa and other places. I've got people that come in and out of my band, for example, that are Portuguese speaking, that are living in homes, 1-bedroom apartments in Newark, that, you know, 10, 12, 14 people are living in those places. And, you know, when you are, I guess, painted with the brush of being on the right side of the spectrum of politics, and you're like, well, Dan, where do you come down on this sanctuary city immigration thing and all these other things? I'm saying, look, anybody who comes to me, I'm going to help. Simple as that. I'm going to help them get a green card. I'm going to help them get a job. I'm going to help them find a place to live. I'm going to help them eat. There's no way I'm going to be hurting them in any situation. And I think that's part of the conversation that goes on with us on a regular basis. Now, to the bigger issue, Dr. Ugoji, I could say, look, I got a space that's empty, you know, 5 days a week. What can I do Anybody who comes to me and says, look, I want to get engaged with you, my job, like I say to Dr. Paul, Dr. Paul says, I need a place to teach class. I always just go, well, mi casa, su casa. You wanted to have a meeting for the UN, mi casa, su casa. I want to help. But as a leader, my main job is to keep my congregation together, do what my people want to do. Ephesians 4, I'm going to support people on a regular basis. Sometimes people will come to me and they'll say, how come you're not out there proclaiming the news on this issue or that issue? I can't do all the issues, but I can support other people that are doing those issues. So it's not that I'm insensitive to the refugees. I'm not insensitive to what's going on around the world, but as we've come together with the Racial Reconciliation Roundtable, we're a little bit in our infant stages that we're coming together and having dialogue. And we're gonna be hitting some hot issues. We want to speak to the refugee issue. We want to speak to the sanctuary issue, but we're going to work on it so that when we speak different than this kind of forum that we're in right now, we're going to work so that when I speak, I'm speaking for Pastor Jones. I'm saying Bishop Bruce is speaking for me, and we're going to try to come together and actually agree on a message, rather than the four of us having four different messages, because we think that is counterproductive to where we're trying to go with this. So it's something that the more we get together, the more we agree on it. But honestly, the refugee issue all by itself could take up the rest of our lives. Just, it really could. That's my thought. Pastor Jones?
Yes, sir, Pastor Dave, you're absolutely,
over to you.
yeah, you're absolutely right. When it comes to what Dr. Ugoji said about not really seeing or hearing the church as a whole speak to the issues of the refugee problem, the immigration problem, definitely the human trafficking problem, is because it is not promoted, Dr. Ugoji. There are a lot of churches doing something, but that's not what's newsworthy. That's not what gets on Channel 2, and definitely not getting on Fox News at all. The reality is that the work is being done in small pockets. I know that that we have churches in the Bronx that have definitely been working, and Dr. Q English has been working very tirelessly in the human trafficking problem, pulling churches together, raising money, offering classes and training to teach faith leaders on how to address the human trafficking problem. But nobody from newspapers is coming to take interviews on that. We're not hearing a lot about what immigration work is being done. I know Dr. Paul has done work with immigration. I definitely know Bishop Perryman has done work with immigration, and especially Pastor Dan, as he flies all over the country trying to help Lottie Dottie and everybody. The reality is that it's not being heard of or seen because it's not something that brings people to knowledge that the church, first of all, still has power. We have power to make these things happen. What we need, first of all, is education on how to do it as faith leaders. Many of us went to seminary. We didn't go to areas of learning when it comes to dealing with the immigration. Many of us don't have the kind of background that myself and Pastor Dan and Pastor Paul and Pastor Bruce has in having resources and accessibility to help people get green cards, to help people have access to attorneys, to help them with their immigration issue, and definitely with the human trafficking issue. My experience, I ran a program in the Kings County District Attorney's Office called Project Respect, where they had young girls that were prostitutes, and we would capture them based on their arrest, but instead of throwing them in prison, we put them in a program for 6 months. We helped them get away from the pimp. We helped them get back into school. We helped them to get back on their feet and get back with their children, reconnect them with their children and their families. But I never saw Channel 2 come down there. I never saw Daily News come and interview us and say, this is a great program. Over 100 young ladies went to that program over a 2-year period. But no one came to say, hey, that was a great job. It's just not something that was being done. And a lot of that work that got done was done not only through the agency of my office, but churches helped me. They helped with clothes, they helped with food, they helped with support. So that's why you're not hearing a lot about what the church is doing, because it's not something that's being promoted as much.
Okay, there's another question I like to throw in for takes. How can we as a corporate body address predominantly Black, brown students, more particularly in this COVID era, in our community, in my community, in your community, And what action can we take to support these students? You know, with the ongoing COVID crisis, it's a tale of two cities, the haves and the have-nots. We take it for granted we can be on lockdown, we could be zooming out, but there are some people, especially students, low-income families, they don't even have laptops. You know, it's caused a tremendous strain on family life. Violence against women and children have increased. What can we do to support the less advantaged community, most specifically the Black and Brown students, the Black and Brown community, so that we can really move from rhetoric, talking about it, to reality and doing something, actually doing something to help this community? And it's not just in the United States, it's predominantly across the globe. In the United Kingdom, where I'm originally from, we speak about what they call the BAM community, the Black, Asian, and minority community. They're suffering firstly because of the ongoing COVID-19 crisis, the lockdown, the fact that schools are not open. Now, as a corporate body of the church, what can we do to make a difference in the lives of the Black and the Brown community and the students? Let us be realistic about it. That we're going to have a lost generation. I mean, these communities are already disadvantaged, but you have the added dimension of the COVID, of the lockdown. Now, what can we do as a church? How can we help this community, this disadvantaged community, before we have a lost generation?
Could we hear from Bishop Bruce?
Yes.
We haven't heard from him in a
Yes,
while.
yeah, you have to see. He wanted to say something.
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect, right? Yes, what we need to do, and this is what we're planning to do, is open up our facilities. You know, we have to make our facilities available, set up our labs, our internet, so that these children who don't have access to the resources and for that reason can't compete with others that do, we have to open up so that we could supply and meet that need. In addition to that, the educators that we have as members of our church have committed to donating their efforts to supplement their educational needs. Because what's going to happen, as you mentioned, Dr. Easy, is because of the lack of these technical devices and the ability to basically keep up, they're falling behind. So we have to put in the effort to supplement whatever it is that they're lacking. Tutorials, have our educators meet with not just the children, but with the parents as well. Also supply food. I mean, a lot of what is missing also with the schools not being open is the school lunches. What we do also is we open up our facility to be able to share. And when I say open up our facility, we will have to, once everything is opened up again, be able to open up to receive them and be able to teach, to train, and supplement the technical deficiencies and also the educational deficiencies as they have fallen behind. That's what we intend to do. And I think that's what we can do. And, it would be probably very taxing on one facility, one church. But I think if we can pool our resources together, if we can come and share ideas, if we can help each other, I think that would be the stronger effort. And that's the key here. We have to come together. We have to speak together. We have to share together. We have to help each other. And I believe we can, and we need to.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bishop Hermon. And more particularly when you mentioned the dimension of the feeding program.
Mhm.
Another aspect of the COVID-19, we're going to have a food scarcity, a food shortage. And some people fail to realize that the only decent meal some students have is when they go to school. And it's quite of concern to realize that we've been on lockdown nearly a year now. How are the children being fed? And we take it for granted, but how are these children being fed? You know, it's an aspect that we really, and I believe the church really has to jump in and take an initiative in that. Pastor Paul, I saw you had your hands up.
Well, I agree 100% with what Bishop Hermon said. And even when in normal times before COVID, I took a neighborhood of the city, a somewhat poor neighborhood of the city, and visited all the after-school programs in the churches. And I was deeply disappointed that there was no, in that neighborhood, that further large neighborhood where I visited lots of places, there was no real active tutoring program. People were not actually giving those students a boost. It was more like you know, a lovely babysitting program to take good care of children whose parents were at work or you know, not able to pick them up or greet them when they came home. And I thought, well, it's meeting a need, but what a huge opportunity when those schools in those neighborhoods, most of the children were way behind, were, you know, 40, as much as 80% of the children in those schools were below grade level in reading, for example. And if there's a group that really is interested in reading skills, it's Christians, because we got a book to read, and we ought to be empowering people to love reading, to be good at reading, to be able to explain what they're reading, and to do so in a fun way. And so I'm motivated to help organize and equip churches to have after-school programs or Saturday morning programs or Sunday afternoon programs that, yes, yeah, give some knowledge of the Bible in the process, but definitely at the same time equip people in language skills such as listening, speaking, reading, and writing, all of which are absolutely necessary to move forward in this world. And I think there are lots of false beliefs that are blocking that. People don't appreciate that these children have as much curiosity as children in more prosperous neighborhoods. We have to fuel that curiosity and drive, you know, to lead them into the excitement that books give. I have a certain background in that because I couldn't read until I was in 6th grade. And I know what it's like not to be able to read. And that's complicated, but it's partly because I'm dyslexic and partly because no one figured out I needed corrective glasses until I was in school for 3 years. So I was way behind. And I had people that believed in me, spent a little time helping me, and that's made all the difference. So I'm motivated to expand that option as I have already to many, but to just multiply that option, especially after COVID. We've got a lot of catching up for these children, and let's make it fun and reward them for their successes.
I believe Pastor Dan, you'd like to say something. I saw you waving your hand.
Yeah, I think that the COVID pandemic lockdown has given us an opportunity to really speak to that issue. I think that if we did organize, but we always have to think about this, and I always talk about this with Paul, a little bit like something that can be maintained, sustained, and that can actually cash flow. You know, I hate to talk like a businessman, but it is my background a little bit, because to get teachers to show up 4 days a week after school to do all that stuff, and with the sentiment of the secular government being pretty anti-church, they'll work with the Catholic Church to a certain extent and give them a grant or two, but to be able to create an environment that we get good press, that we're doing good work, that the journalists aren't coming by to look for that one outlier case where somebody's disgruntled or upset, you know, because this is what's happened to the church over the years. And that's the work that we're doing right now, Dr. Easy, is that we are coming together to get to learn about each other, to trust each other. And my background is kind of logistical, it's business, it's how do we make these things work? You know, you've been to my church. It's a humble church in Lower Manhattan, but you don't find a lot of churches in Manhattan that are independent churches that can keep a space going for 30 years. You know, it's like you have to have a little bit of a business acumen to make a concept like an after-school tutoring program, a safe house for refugees, all of these different things. And one of the things that is absolutely necessary, and we talked about this at our last meeting of the roundtable, is third-party validation. Because if I go into a situation and Pastor Jones doesn't speak well of me after having spent time with me, the project's dead. Bishops, so we're working on that concept early. I think if you come back to us a year from now, Dr. Easy, and you say to us, well, what have you done? What have you done to refugees? What have you done on after school programs? And we've added 20 people to our ranks. We'll say to you, well, we created committees for every one of those issues. We're writing about those things. We've come to an agreement on it. Because right now, I can guarantee you, if I was going to create a program, it would be different than the one Bishop Perriman would create or Pastor Jones would create. But if we got together, the programs that each of us would create would be the best program or better than the one we would have thought of by ourselves. So the dialogue is absolutely essential at this point. We are taking painstaking effort right now, not only to diagram or to dialogue, but to diagram and come into agreement on what we actually do believe is right. And then giving each other the benefit of the doubt that all of our intentions are good. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. used to say it all the time. You know, it's nothing is more frustrating than good people with shallow intent. You know, when people don't think things through, when they don't go all the way through to the end, they don't make a proper commitment, they don't have courage, and they don't have the compassion that you were talking about before. So we're doing that work now. We're in that infant stage, and we're working on these things right now. So I just say, give us a little time here, Doc. Give us some time to think these things out, because we're on the right track. And I think these are some of the right men. And we hope to grab some women, some men, some Hispanics, some Asians. We want to grab some people from across the spectrum to have these conversations. And you're such a big thinker that we have to take the elephant one bite at a time. So it is something that we're going to have to work on one project at a time.
Okay.
Yes. Oh, you froze for a moment there.
Pastor
Ugoji.
Sorry?
No, you froze there for a moment, Ugoji.
Oh, sorry.
It's
Yeah,
cold
I'm
outside, I understand.
The weather's bad yet. Let me give you an opportunity to plug the racial reconciliation.
It's the internet seems to be. Can you say it again, Ugoji? It was getting.
Could you tell us about the roundtable core value?
Who is that?
Dr. Jones.
Dan.
Oh, you want me to? Well, you know, I really feel like this is Dr. Jones or Pastor Jones's baby. And I think that
okay, so Pastor Jones, let me put the question to you.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. I hear you, Dr. I hear you. Our commitment and our dedication is to make sure that there is definitely unity in the body of Christ. We have set up our opportunity to come together and have dialogue about what makes us more unified than makes us separate. We are a group of clergy leaders that believe in the one Lord, one faith, one baptism. Jesus Christ is the King of everything. But what we have already agreed upon is that the church has to work unified to address all of these issues that have now become so paramount in our lives and in our mission. And while Pastor Dan said it very clearly, we're taking this elephant a little bite at a time to lay foundational work, to put our vision and mission statement in place, to make sure that we have it memorized, which I don't clearly, that we have it really understood, that we have it understood. That
Well,
first of all, This is what we want to do. This is something we wanted to do. When you talked about the issue of our young people, and Pastor Dan said it great, and Pastor Bishop Perryman said it great. We have churches that are normally closed during the day for several hours. We have the space. Thank God for COVID. Many of us had to push our Wi-Fi's up. Many of us had to get laptops and had to get computers because we had no other way of reaching our congregations. And now God has blessed us through COVID to be in a position to actually open our doors. I know that in my church, at first we weren't really pushing a whole lot with food pantries, and now we've served over almost 1,500 people in our food program that we just started because of COVID. We were able to do over 300 people in COVID testing at the church because we realized we got the space and we had people that are interested. So these problems that have come up have now pushed us to a place of unifying our efforts to make our houses of worship not to be silos of the frozen chosen, but to be a place where people of all nations and all congregations can come together to address the germane problem of humanity, of dealing with the issues of food issues, of not having a Wi-Fi. Really, we're going to let a child fail because somebody couldn't afford Wi-Fi? That's just ludicrous. And the Racial Reconciliation Roundtable has already started in the dialogue of how we can unify our voice to be almost like a piercing light in these dark times, that we can come together, we can reconcile ourselves to move past our racial differences and help people to deal with the issues that are really stopping them from being the best people they can be.
Thank you, Pastor Jones.
So one of the running themes that I hear is collaboration, and how people even between churches can collaborate, and that's one of the kind of hallmarks of our organization, We the World. It's like we answer that question: what can we do together that we can't do on our own? And we realize when we do work together that the result is more impact than we can have individually. So we can do that at many different levels, as we're saying. Is there anything that anyone wants to share before we finish up?
I could round up.
I think just the invitation, if someone wants to know more, wants to connect with us, they could connect with Dr. Ugoji, and she can pass on the linkage to us. So we invite follow-up from the audience.
One of the things I'd like to say, team, is, and to especially to the Racial Reconciliation Roundtable, is, this year is the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And our church was destroyed on 9/11. And so we will be having some meetings. People will be coming from around the world to be with us in our humble abode where you all have been thus far. But I invite us to really begin to bring in a part of that weekend. We should focus on, racism, discrimination, and prejudice, and we should be talking about that. So each of you should plan to speak, as it were, and we'll bring it down and share and make it very, very important. If we go all the way back to, again, to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s words, a riot really comes from a place where people aren't heard. When people don't feel like their message is being heard, violence breaks out. And we certainly had violence on that day in 9/11, 2001. We're having violence across our nation now when people aren't being heard. So what we're doing by hearing each other is absolutely important, but it's important to our followings, our congregation, the people that we lead, that they see us hearing each other. They see us purposing to hear each other and not only hearing each other, but making it a priority. So to us, 9/11, since we burned for 5 days on that day, that's a priority. That's a memorial service for us. But I want to take it and mark it with this message, that this is the core message. This is why the towers burned. This is why we've had so much unrest across our nation. This is why. So we're taking on the core issue. And this is why the refugees aren't taken care of. This is why the kids aren't getting taught in school. It's because we just would rather be mad at each other and not listening to each other than taking care of people. Let's come against that message. That's my thought. So you're asking us what we're going to do tangibly. That's my olive branch. That's my offer. That's just a suggestion. You can all tell me I'm full of beans. That's fine. But we can go from there.
So I'm so thankful that you mentioned that because we have an annual program called 11 Days of Global Unity,
Right.
and it starts on 9/11, and it goes through September 21st, which is the International Day of Peace. So, and that started as a journey from fear to hope.
Okay.
Right, from from September 11th to September 21st. So this year will be a special year, and I hope we can collaborate with what you were just talking about.
Well, it's nice to meet you, and let's, through Paul and Dr. Ugoji Easy, we can maybe sit down and have lunch one day.
That sounds good. And Dr. Ugoji, do you want to let people know how people can get in touch with you, as we were all saying, if people want to connect to any of our guests today?
Well, you can connect with me. Yeah, my email, I'm sure, is out there. I'm easy to find. Just connect
Okay.
me through my email, UGOJ.
Oops, it's breaking up a little bit there.
JIA.
Oh, sorry, it's breaking up a little bit, Ugoji.
The weather is bad here.
That's I think what's going on.
Okay.
But
Yes, I think we should.
people can get in touch through We the World at email would be info@wetheworld.org. info@wetheworld.org. And people can also reach me directly by rick@wetheworld.org. So that's one way, and then we can connect in all different ways going forward. Anyone else want to say something? Last thoughts?
Yes, I'd like to say some last thoughts before my internet goes off.
Okay.
I'd like to conclude with a saying from Archbishop Desmond Tutu when he says that he speaks of Ubuntu, which is a Swahili saying. He says, one of the sayings of our country is Ubuntu, the essence of being human. Ubuntu speaks particularly about the fact that you cannot exist as a human being in isolation. It speaks about our interconnectedness. You can't be human all by yourself. And when you have all this quality, Ubuntu, you are known for your generosity. So gentlemen, I end by saying Ubuntu. We have
Ubuntu.
to connected.
Thank you, Ugoji. And I have a couple of announcements before we finish up. You can sign up for the full MLK schedule updates and to take action and be of service yourself with your organization if you have one. Just go to we.net/MLK. And this is for our program Manifesting the Dream, which goes through February 28th. And of course, collaboration is fundamental to what We the World is and what we do. And to collaborate with We the World and the We campaign in general, you can go to we.net/partner. And to see and post social change and cultural events on our calendar, you can go to globalunitycalendar.org. And of course, everything we do can be found by going to we.net. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke about creating the beloved community, and that is really what we is all about. And that's why I always say, and I think we accomplished this today. We did three things. We inspire, inform, and involve. And so we did those three today, and three I's make a we. So we can go from a me society, this is an M, to a we society. So I want to thank you all for this excellent racial reconciliation roundtable. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for
Thank you.
everything. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
so
you, Rick.
much.
Thank you, Ugoji.
All right,
Thank
we'll see
you
all
all.
you guys
Thank you.
soon.
See you guys soon.
Good night.
Okay.
Stay well.
Love you all.
All right.
Love you.